Hi, my name's Nick Lewis. I've been asked by ArtStation to put together this tutorial that covers the process of hand painting normal maps in Photoshop. I hand paint the normal maps, I bring them into a 3D layer in Photoshop, and it enables me to change the lighting conditions and the surface properties of my paintings and my photographs. And it's been really handy, and I've been playing around with this for the last couple of months. So before I go over the process of hand painting normal maps, creating 3D layers and stuff like that, I thought I'd just cover the kind of effects that I've been getting by creating these normal maps and bringing them in. I've got this photo of Frederick Douglass that I painted over the top of, so I created this normal map here. I created a 3D layer, brought in the normal map, and what that's allowed me to do is to create a kind of 3D relief of Frederick Douglass, and I can change the properties of this relief, and I can also change the lighting conditions. So with this directional light, I can move where the light is, where the direction of the light comes from. I can also change the surface properties of the of this kind of metallic surface, so I can make it more or less reflective. I can make it more or less shiny as well. And I can also change the blending mode. So if I change to something like a hard light over the top of the photo, it makes the photo look metallic. It makes the photo look more like it's printed on a kind of relief surface. For things like concepts, I put together this little test of a mech where I created a normal map that is lit with 4 different lights. So I've got a fill light, I've got a rim light in here as well, or if I can just collect, that's it. And I can change the intensity of those lights, so I can turn the intensity up and down. I can also move these little point lights around where I can just change where they sit in the scene. And it means that at any point in the process when I'm painting it and I think, well, I'd like to change the way it's lit, or I'd like to change the lighting direction, I can do that, which has just been really helpful. For those of you that aren't really familiar with normal maps or how they're used in a 3D workflow, I'm going to quickly summarize how they work. This is a normal map in Photoshop that I've put together. The top left is going to be sphere, and the bottom right is going to be a kind of brick. As you can see, it uses a very specific color palette. So we've got green, blue, pink, and light blue. And these colors are used to reflect light differently as it hits a 3D surface. If I look at this normal map as applied to a 3D surface in Maya, you can see that that sphere has really popped out, as well as this brick. And I can move a dynamic light around and it will reflect the light as if these are actually sticking out from the surface. But if I turn the camera around and I move it slightly and I look at it from the side, you can see that the surface is completely flat. So that texture is what's making the light reflect in this way. If we compare the original normal map in Photoshop with the way it's been applied in Maya, you can see how the color is changing the way that the light is reflected. So the green color here is reflecting light that's coming from the top. The blue is reflecting the light that's coming from the bottom left. The pink is reflecting the light that's coming from the bottom right. And then this light blue is reflecting light that's coming head on. To create this brick effect where it sticks out from the surface, what I've done is I've color picked what I think is the angle of the surface that I want to paint directly from the sphere. So just to give you a quick example, this top edge here is roughly 45 degrees at the top, and that would correspond with an area just up here on the sphere, which would probably be about 45 degrees. So I'm just going to hold down Alt and color pick from there, and so I just paint that in. Do the same on the right hand side for doing this angle here. The same on the bottom here for doing this one. And then the same on the left hand side here. and that's how I just created those edges. To give you an idea of what's going on in my head when I'm colour picking from the sphere and painting the normals in Photoshop, I've come back into Maya to show how this is being imagined in 3D. So when I colour pick from the sphere, I'm imagining that it is actually a 3D sphere, and that I'm colour picking from the angle on the sphere that corresponds with the angle that I'm trying to paint. So in this instance, it was the top edge here. And the angle that I want to paint is this top edge of the brick. So I go and colour pick from there, and then I paint that top angle. I was colour picking from, well, on this instance, from the left hand side, and I paint on the left, colour pick on the right, paint on that side, and then from the bottom. And each time what I'm trying to do is imagine that I'm touching on the point on the sphere where the angle corresponds with the angle of the surface that I'm trying to paint. One of the simplest and best ways to demonstrate how this works is to put together a really simple mountain range, which shouldn't take too long to do, and I can just do it by colour picking from a couple of different sections on the sphere. I've created a new layer here, and I'm just going to create a really basic shape here that's kind of looks roughly mountainous. And I figure that this side of the mountain is kind of facing a little bit to the left. It roughly corresponds to this angle on the sphere. So I'm going to colour pick from there, and I'm just going to fill. And on the right hand side, I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to create a basic shape here. And this surface is predominantly going to be facing the right hand side, and I'm just going to fill there. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I've just sped this little section up where I've just been adding in a few bits of detail into the normal map. So I've sped it up maybe a times 2 times 3 just to speed this little bit along. Okay, so just completed that one. I'm going to save this off, and we're going to save off the PNG. And that'll be my normal map in there. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to convert that to a 3D layer. So what you need to make sure of when you start is in your workspace, you need to make sure it's in a 3D workspace. So if you're not already in that workspace, go to Window, Workspace, 3D, and let's just get the layers up. Now, if I go on the 3D tab down here on the bottom right, I'm going to create a 3D postcard. That's usually the default there, and I'm just going to click on Create. So if I go back into my layer, I can now see that I've got a 3D layer because it's got this little 3D cube that's indicated down here, and I can't see anything. And the reason for that is I don't have any lighting. If I go into my 3D tab, I can see in here I've got my environment and scene, and I've also got my mesh, which is my postcard, which is actually filling this layer, although you can't see it. And I've got, this is my mesh actually in layer 3. If I click on that, I can just change a few of these properties and we can start seeing some results. So I'm going to change the opacity by just removing that texture. What it's done is it's picked up the fact that the layer that I first created had nothing in it, and it assumed that I wanted to make a completely transparent layer. So I'm going to take away the default opacity texture that it's created there. I'm going to load in my normals. So I'm going to load in the mountain normals in here, and I'm going to create a light so I can see what I've created. So if I go into my environment, I can see there's a little light bulb down here on the right hand side. Click on that, new infinite light, and there you can see the mountains have appeared in there. So that's my mountain side. At the moment this is just grayscale because I've got no texture applied to these mountains at all, and I've only got a white light in there, so I can add in a couple of different things. Now I don't need shadow, so when I click on my light I can select it any time in my 3D tab. You'll see that shadow is ticked. I don't need that because I don't actually have any true three-dimensional objects in here. I'm just applying this texture to what it's calling a postcard, which is just a flat mesh. So I'm going to turn off shadow because sometimes that causes a couple of problems, causes stripes to appear on the screen and stuff like that. I'm going to add in an image-based light, which is indicated by this IBL up here. If I go and click on the folder, and if I go to low texture, I can choose from a couple of HDRs that I've got up here, which I'm going to try out. And I'll get some color from this image-based light. So this is one of the image-based lights, very subtle color in there. I'm going to try a different one. And there's a few that I can change. And they're all pretty subtle, but that'll do fine. I'm quite happy with that. If I go to the infinite light again, I can add in some color to this. So if I wanted a yellow, I can add that in there, and I can just up the intensity a little bit as well. And I might create another light by creating a new infinite light in here, just to balance things out a little bit. So there's my blue in there. So as you can see, hopefully straight away, within a couple of minutes, I've created a really basic mountain range, but I've created something where I can change the color palette and I can change the colors and lighting really, really quickly by just shifting these around and just playing around with things like the image-based lighting. Normal maps are not the only thing that we can apply in 3D layers. We can also create diffuse and specular maps as well. I'm going to create a quick diffuse map here just to create some strata on the surface of the mountains. I've created this new layer. I'm just going to rename it to diffuse, and I'm just going to create some really, really basic shapes in here. Again, for this part, I've just sped this up because you can see what I'm doing, adding in the detail, but you don't necessarily need to see it real time. So it's just sped up 2 to 3 times. Create my diffuse layer here. I'm going to cut out the bit that I need by just selecting the main part of my normal map here. And go to select, inverse, delete the path, the diffuse that I don't need. And I can do a couple of things. I can drag this over the top of my 3D layer here. Now you can't see anything because I haven't changed the blend mode, but I can change that to something like an overlay, or we'll just go through sort of soft light or something like that, and then it appears like a diffuse map in 3D would. So we're adding color over the top of that form that we've created with the normal map. The other way we could also do that is by creating a diffuse texture. So I'm just going to create one of those. So as a texture, if I go into diffuse, I'm going to load or replace the texture, which is this one here, and then that'll come in as the diffuse. So you can do it either way. I prefer the other way because you've got a bit more control over how it's going to appear. I'd have to do quite a bit to this diffuse texture in order to change things. What I can also do is I'll mask off areas, because you can see that in the diffuse this has come up purple because I've got some of the normal map background still in there. If I just select this normal area, you can see where my mountains are, this section of mountains here. Just going to select that section of mountains, and I'm going to mask off my 3D layer here. So if I just click on the mask, and that just masks that off, which is quite handy. I can turn that there, and I'm just going to trim that out a little bit as well. So I've masked off the sky part, and I'm just going to put in some blue, a roughly blue sky in the background, and just a bit of gradient anyway, just for fun. For some painting and just painting over things, sometimes you don't have the functionality that you would normally have when you're painting because you're in the 3D workspace. So sometimes you've got to pop back into the essentials or painting workspace in order to get things like gradients and stuff like that. So as I said before, what I prefer to do is, although you can load in a diffuse texture, I prefer actually just to layer over a diffuse texture over the top using a different, then you've got some control over the blend modes and how that appears. So I'm going to go back onto this. I'm going to take away the diffuse texture on here and just remove that. That means we can go back to this diffuse that we had before, and I can make a few changes to this. I can change it, so I can use overlay, hard light, soft light, etc., just to change the way that that is blending in with the form of the mountains that's underneath. If at any point I'm not happy with the lighting, or if I want to make some changes to it, I can just go back into it and make little amendments to it here. So I can just do a couple of things to this one. Drop the angle of the light. Make it brighter and darker if I want to. Add the contrast. Or I can add in other lights as well. So if I go into my 3D tab again and click on that light, I can add in something like a point light, which will arrive here at the bottom left corner. The thing I mentioned about the shadows causing problems, you can see where it's right in line with the plane that it's lighting up. So it's getting a little bit confused. We're getting a little bit of what looks like Z fighting here, where we're getting stripes across the screen. If I turn off shadows, that'll disappear, and I'm just going to pull it out ever so slightly. So if I create this new point light, it'll light absolutely everything up because there's no real fall off. But I can add in a light fall off by clicking light fall off in here, reducing the outer, the inner size right down, and the outer as well. So I can reduce that to about there. So the inner fall off, it starts to fall off using this inner circle or this inner sphere here until it's completely, the light's completely fallen off and stopped emitting by the time it hits this outer sphere here. That means and then I can just move this around. So if I had like a beacon or something in the mountains, I could add it in there if I wanted to. So it's just a quick demonstration of the way you can use point lights and directional lights and add them into the scene, as well as adding in a diffuse layer as well. Apart from color picking and painting, what you can also do is create more regular 3D objects by copying sections of the sphere and copying and pasting them and putting them together. I'm going to demonstrate this by creating a basic ring. I've got a template here which has all the surfaces of the ring that I need. It's going to have a slight bevel on it. It's got a side, an inside, and then this outer surface here. I'm going to copy and paste sections from the sphere in order to make up the normal map for this ring. For that, I need to use both a convex sphere, which is the one that I've been using up until now, the sphere that pokes out, but also a concave sphere, which is the opposite, which is a sphere that pushes in, and I'll need that for the inner surface of the ring. So if I turn on this template, I'm just going to quickly select areas, the areas that I need to copy and paste. So from the convex sphere, I'm going to copy the outer section. I'm going to copy this bevel here. So for that, what I need to do is, if I just copy this part of the sphere, it won't be quite right because the angle doesn't match the angle that this bevel is at. The bevel that I currently have is closer to, I'm going to have to move it in order for this to work. Let's have a look. Is pretty much should be around about here. So I'm going to go to select, transform selection, going to move this to a different area of the sphere, one that more reflects or more closely reflects the angle that this part of the ring, this bevel, is at, which is roughly there. And I'm just going to move that there. I'm going to copy from the convex sphere, Control C, Control V. Just going to move it back to where it was. I should see it appearing here. Here we go. So I just want to make sure that's sitting in the right place. Yeah, it's around about there. I'll do. And so we've got the bevel in there. We've got our outer edge, which you can't see at the moment because it's sat on top of the sphere. But if I turn that off, you can see that's that outer edge. Here we go. I'm also going to take the side, which is this one here. Just going to select that. Now, instead of copying a section of the sphere, I'm just going to color pick for this one because I just need to color pick because it's going to be flat. I'm just going to color pick from the side of the sphere around about here. That's roughly the angle that I'm after, and I'm just going to fill that. So you can see I'm gradually building this up. If I turn off the sphere there, you can see I've got the general shape, but just no inside. And if I turn on this inner area here, I'm going to select that. And this is what I'm going to use the concave sphere for. So just turn that visibility off for a second. I'm just going to use a section of this part here. Now, I need to transform the selection of this because actually I need to make sure that this area is showing that the curve of the inside of this ring will properly follow and go right up to the top and right up to the bottom, right down to the bottom. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'm going to transform select this one again. Transform selection. I'm just going to scale it up. Copy that. I'm just going to, and I'm going to match it with the size that it was originally. It's about there. And now I'm going to turn that off. So now I've got my sphere. Just to go over a few of the colors that are going on here. As I mentioned before, the green is for surfaces that are pointing up. The pinky purple is for surfaces that are pointing down. The blue is more from the left hand side. So as you can see, the inside of the ring here, because this surface curls right round and over, I needed to make sure the color here was a kind of pinky purple color. Otherwise that wouldn't have looked quite right. If I'd have copied it straight from the convex sphere and not the concave one, this would have been green, and it would have meant that the inside would have looked like it was reflecting light upwards. It would have looked inside out and looked very strange. So that's why I've created that. So I'm going to copy this and save it to a new PNG of a ring. I'm going to save over the original because I think this is maybe a little bit better, I'm hoping. I'm going to create a new 3D layer. So going into the 3D tab, making sure you're in Window, Workspace, and 3D. And I'm going to create a new 3D postcard. If I use the Move tool and just click on that layer twice, all the properties will come up, or I can just simply click on the material under the mesh here in the 3D tab. I'm going to delete the opacity because it doesn't need any, and that's going to go grey. You may be that when you create them you don't get the opacity in there, but if you can't see anything, go in there and just have a look. It may be the case that you've got a completely see-through texture in there. And now I'm going to drop in the normal, so load the texture in there, and again I can't see anything until I add in a light, so I'm going to click on this, new infinite light, and that's where the ring shows up. Just as before, I'm going to add in some image-based lighting. So if I just go to my environment in IBL here, the folder just next to it, I'm going to go to load texture, going to go to my HDRs and just load in a texture in there, and you can see that it's catching the light properly, and that's looking just about right. And I can just move around my infinite light and change that as well. I can make the material shiny or not. I can just up the reflection so it looks super shiny. Oops. Just play around with those. And I can also play around with the diffuse to make it look darker and lighter as well. So that's how you create a more regular looking 3D object. So there's very little color picking. It's mainly in just copying and pasting sections of the sphere. The last thing I wanted to go over was specular maps, because there might be some areas of your painting that you want to be more shiny than others, and some areas that you want to be more matte. For this, I've got a dress and a coat. The dress I want to be more shiny, the coat I want to be more matte, and I've created a specular map for it. So the lighter areas are going to be more shiny, the darker areas are going to be more matte. It's really, really rough, but it's just for demonstrating this idea. I'm going to go into my 3D layer and I'm going to find the material properties, and I'll find them in there, or again, if you need to, you can just keep clicking on your image. And finally I'll get up my specular map here. I'm going to load in the texture that I created, and you can see immediately that the coat is quite shiny because I gave it kind of a mid-grey. The dress is very shiny because it was much lighter, near white, but it really pops out because the dress is clearly shinier than the coat, and that's just basically down to the specular map, where I've specified what I want to be matte and what I want to be more shiny. I can increase reflection as well using the sliders and change the shine on things, so I do have extra control in there, but it's just a really handy way of making sure I allocate the right amount of specularity to the right areas of the painting. Just as a bit of fun, and just to demonstrate how being able to light something differently in the same PSD can be really useful, I created this cat doing some welding. I created a couple of different normal maps. This was one of them. This was when the flame is on. I needed a visor to be down and his ears to be back. There's another one where the ears are up and the visor's up. And what I did with that was I lit it differently, or lit those normal maps slightly differently, or very differently. So this was the light coming in from the back and also from the front, fairly even lighting with a little bit of contrast in the middle. And then I changed the normal map and had no light from the back and a really bright glare from the front to give the impression that the welding torch has been switched fully on. And then I just flicked between those two separate frames to create the animation of the welding torch being switched on and being turned off again, so that we can see his visor flipping up and down as the torch is switched on and off. And this was just to demonstrate how you can have dramatically different lighting using pretty much the same normal map, which can be really useful. It's particularly useful if you've got clients who want to just try out different lighting additions, or they want to make sort of changes to the lighting halfway through doing a paint, or they just want to be able to change the materials as well and just see what those variations would look like. And this was just a way of demonstrating that. So that concludes the tutorial on hand painting normal maps. I hope you found it useful, and thanks very much for watching.